We are on to reports and discussion. I believe the first is community survey. Sorry.
I would ask Susan Brott and Bill Morris with Morris Letterman to come forward and provide kind of the highlights of a survey that was taken in June of 2016, June, July 2016. Welcome, Mr. Morris and Susan.
Good evening, members of the board and public. During the work session just prior to this, Dr. Morris went into some more detail, but we did want him to come and present this for the public again to just share a little bit about the survey that we did in June and July. This is an annual community survey that we do on satisfaction, and we did do an oversample of parents as well as general community. It was actually an additional portion that we talked about some other data that we'll be sharing with the task force looking at start and end times next week, but he's going to be focusing on the trends in climate data or climate satisfaction.
Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening to talk about the findings of the survey that we undertook on behalf of the district. The methodology, let me explain the parameters of this study. First, we interviewed 400 randomly selected adult residents of the Edina School District itself. This was based on a random digit dialing scheme and included 37% of households that were cell phone only households. That tends to be an issue in surveys, but it was covered very, very well in the random selection process here. We then augmented this with 300 randomly selected parents of current Edina Public School students, randomly chosen from lists provided by the school district. The interviews were conducted by telephone between June 21st and July 14th. The typical respondent took 17 minutes. However, we did have 5% who were with us for over an hour and 20 minutes. The results of the study, first, are projectable to all Edina School District residents within plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases, and second, to all parents of current Edina School District children within plus or minus 5.5% in 95 out of 100 cases. Let's begin first with a question that we've been tracking for the district now for a number of years. We asked residents and parents to evaluate or rate the quality of public schools in the Edina School District. They could tell us they were either excellent, good, only fair, or poor. As you can see first, in comparison, there's been a fair stabilization in terms of the number of excellent respondents and good responses. So we have 94% who gave a positive response, while only 5% were more critical. If we take a look at the excellent ratings, which is one of the indicators we use for ranking school districts, 56% overall of all residents rated the quality of the public schools here as excellent. That 56% places the Edina Public Schools within the top 5 across the greater metropolitan area. Now, let's break this down a little and make some comparisons between parents and the overall sample. And as we expected to see, parents were more generous in terms of excellent ratings. As you can see, that went up to almost 2/3 of the parent sample, 65% saying excellent, 32% indicating good, for a combined positive total then of 97%. Only 3% indicated more negative ratings, and no one, as we would have expected, was unsure about the quality of public schools here. So an exceptional rating overall, but also a very, very high rating in comparison to what we find in other districts with respect to the parent sample itself. Now, we asked an open-ended question, and by that I mean we did not suggest any responses to the respondent at the time. What do you like most about the Edina Public Schools? And we have first a chart that shows both the overall responses and the parent responses. And as you can see, a number of things that we've seen trending in the past are still present for us. The race is always between those who rate the academic programs here as excellent versus those that rate the academic program as good. But 40% overall of the sample said either good or excellent, while 32% of the parents indicated the same designation. What's particularly impressive is the 24% saying excellent academics within the overall sample. That is by itself the highest that we have across the metropolitan area in terms of a top-of-the-mind question. Now, teachers also came into play, and that's one of the attributes of the Edina Public Schools that always rate very, very highly. 19% of the parents indicated that they liked most of the teachers, 16% of the overall sample. Now, were there any major differences? And the answer to that is very, very little. A broad curriculum and variety of programs, each have come into recent surveys that we've taken for the district and are still highly rated, among 19% of the overall sample and 23% of the parents themselves. And finally, one other aspect that we've noticed, which is fairly unique to the Edina Public School District, is the level of communications. That came in at 11% being the thing that the people liked most by the parents and 8% by the overall. Normally, across the metropolitan area, that comes in at maybe 2% or 3% if it is even mentioned in this open-ended choice. Now, if we're going to ask what do people like most, we should also ask what they consider to be the most serious issue facing the schools. And again, we have an over time chart first. And this is comparing overall sample to overall sample, that is all residents. And as you can see, some things have changed a little bit. Other things, however, have stayed pretty much the same. And I'd like to first point out to the bottom of the chart. These are the folks that said you have no serious issues as far as they were concerned. In fact, about half of them indicated, how dare we ask that question, that we were impugning something about their district, which is not the case. 33% indicated in this study that there's nothing. These are your boosters. These are the folks that tend to be with you and rate you very, very highly, regardless of the question area that we're looking at. Now, what kinds of things were also pointed to? Well, this year, as you can see, high taxes was a concern of 15%. At 11% was large class sizes, and those two have also been themes that we've noticed in the past over the years. Artificial turf came in at 1% this year, increasing diversity at 4%. These we call pre-issues. They're small in terms of something to be monitored in the future, but we don't consider anything to be a major factor if it's below 5 to 10%. Now, if we separate out parents from the overall sample, we can again see some marked changes between the two groups. First, one non-change is the number of boosters in both groups. This school district is unique in having as many boosters in the overall sample as they did among the parent sample, at 34% and at 33%. Now, keep in mind the metropolitan average on this, when we've asked this question in other metropolitan area suburban school districts, the normal number of people that tell us nothing, that there are no serious issues, is 8%. So you're still running much higher. You're 4 times as high as we would expect to see given that norm across Metro. Now, what kinds of things did parents mention? Well, large class sizes again came in at 16%, lack of discipline at 9%, and then we start really falling down into that 5% category. Again, large class sizes has been a major response among most of the metropolitan area school districts. However, the response here is somewhat more limited. It's more moderate. In other districts, we found that going as high as 30% among parents to almost 40% among parents. That's not to say it isn't an issue. It isn't appearing as frequently as it does in some other school districts, generally to your west. A key question was whether or not people thought the district was going in the right direction or it got off on the wrong track. And again, what we're looking at here is 2015 to 2016. The 71% in 2015 was among the highest across Metro. That has now increased to 77%, which is a very solid rating, again within the top 4 or 5 districts across Metro. Wrong track is at 12%, and both was half this time. 15% thought that you were going on the right direction in some ways and on the wrong track on others. That dropped to 8%. So in general, then, the change from 2015 to 2016 is a positive one. Now, what's the difference between the parent sample and the overall sample? The parent sample was more apt to say that the district is going in the right direction. 87% indicated that they thought that was the case. 7% saw it off on the wrong track, and 3% said both, sometimes in the right direction, sometimes off on the wrong track. But there is a 10% dividend, if you will, among the parent sample, and 87% of the parents indicating the right direction is at the top of the metropolitan area during the past 2 years. Now, the next chart takes a look at specific perception questions that residents and the parent sample was also asked. People could say they agreed or disagreed. The blue lines tend to indicate agreement. The red lines, disagreement, and the yellow lines, people indicated they were just unsure, they couldn't answer that question. So if we begin with the first one, do people feel that you spend taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently? 82%, which is a very high-end metro-wide, indicated they agreed with that statement, while only 7% disagreed. Do people feel they're getting a good value from their investment in public education? 96%, which is at the very top, said yes, they agreed with that, with only 3% disagreeing. What about the spending of past referendum funds? Were those funds spent responsibly as promised? Well, that wasn't asked in 2015, so there are only two bars really to compare. And at 78%, people agreed with that statement, while 12% disagreed, and 11% were unsure. Now, do you do a good job of involvement in making policies, in making your decisions? Do you include all stakeholders? And we specifically refer to parents, we've referred to community leaders, and we have referred to residents overall. As you can see, that's gone up. In 2014, that was an 81%. Currently, it is at a high of 89%, also the highest in the metro area. Are people satisfied with your decision-making process? That also changed markedly. Now, keep in mind that 2015 was a referendum election year for you. And in referendum election years, we tend to find that going down a bit, which it did, 71%, unusually low. In 2016, 2 years later, however, we're at 85%. So in each and every case but one, spending past referendum funds responsibly and as promised, we are above the 80% mark. Now, 2 new questions were added this time. Do people feel that the board and the administration is doing the right thing for children? 91% indicated yes on that, only 7% indicated a negative. And a new question, the first time we've asked this anywhere. Do people feel you're doing right for the taxpayers of this district? And that was 86% to 8%. So in general, we can see the positive side tends to dominate overwhelmingly, and that the change over time has been in the positive direction. Now, what about the difference between the overall and parents? And let me summarize this very quickly. If we take a look throughout and compare the blue bars, the darker blue being the overall agreement, and the parent agreement being the lighter blue, you can see that parents, by and large, were more positive in their answers with respect to agreeing with those statements that I just reviewed with you. In fact, if we go through this, we can see that in the parent case, the percentage of agreement never falls below 85%. Now let's move directly to financial management. How do people view the management of finances in this district? And the norm on this currently across the metropolitan area is 55% giving a positive rating to 45% giving a more negative rating. Here we actually have 70% indicating this year an excellent or a good rating to 23% indicating a more critical rating. If we take a look at changes going on, you can see that there's an exchange going on between excellent and good. The 17% excellent is 7 points higher than a year ago, while the good rating dropped 4% from its level in 2015. The poor and unsure remain stable. Well, what's the difference between the overall and parents? And again, we find parents being more positive in their overall orientations. 79% of parents indicated a positive rating, with 16% excellent, and 14% rated the board and the district lower, at 23% down overall, then 9% from the overall. Parents, again, and this has been a pattern we've found across the metropolitan area, do tend to be more positive. However, here on financial management, parents are extraordinarily positive in comparison to other areas. Let's move to job performance ratings now. And we're looking here at the 2014 survey versus the 2016 survey. And I might add, we only compare if the questions are identically worded from survey to survey to survey. So we have actual apple-to-apple comparisons. The school board rating actually went up by 4%, statistically insignificant, but certainly in the right direction, from 72%, of 17% rating them unfavorable. The administration, including the superintendent, at 78% favorable to 14% unfavorable. Principals, who have always been very, very popular, going back over time when we've asked this question, 83% favorable this year to only 8% unfavorable. And finally, teachers and instructional staff, which has always been highly valued here among not only parents, but also residents as a whole. This time, it hit 91%. Very, very little change, but you were also starting 2 years ago extraordinarily highly in terms of the favorable rating. Now, what do parents think in comparison? And again, we see in most cases that the favorable ratings actually increase. So we have 86% of the parents that rate the school board as either excellent or good. We have in the administration, including the superintendent, the same number, 86%. With principals, we see them at 93%, which is a statistically significant increase from 2014. And among teachers and instructional staff, 96% this time rated them excellent or good. In general, then, we see that the shifts are toward the positive as we move from the overall resident core to the parent core itself. Let's move now to strategic plans. We asked a number of questions about the strategic plan. And the first one we asked had to do with familiarity with the plan. And we asked people, how familiar are you with it? And gave them 4 choices: very, somewhat, not too, or not at all. 34% indicated that they were familiar with the plan. And this is overall, again, among all residents, while 65% indicated they were either not too familiar or not at all familiar. That may seem like a large number, but also keep in mind that this district is very homogeneous and has a fairly large population over the age of not 85, but over the age of 55. As a result, what we have found when we ask about strategic planning or that kind of thing with respect to a school district issue, there is an age relationship on that. The older the resident tends to be, the less familiar they are with the kind of planning that's going on. However, that doesn't seem to dim their judgments in this district with respect to how the board and the administration and everybody else is doing. Now, what about the district progress in meeting the plan's objectives? And again, this was only asked of those that indicated they were familiar with the plan. And what we found was that 91% rate the progress on this as either excellent or good, while more critical ratings of only fair and poor are at 6%. So in general then, while familiarity at 34% may not be as high as we would like to see, but nevertheless is in line with other strategic planning that's been done in neighboring districts, when we take a look at what those familiar with the planning process and with the progress being made, you can see that it's an overwhelmingly positive evaluation. Now let's break this down by parents versus the overall. And here we would expect to see a majority of parents, hopefully, saying that they were familiar with the strategic plan. 52% indicated that was the case, that they're either very familiar or somewhat familiar. And unfamiliarity was at 47%. So that's what I've expected to see based on experiences with many other metropolitan area school districts. Now, what's about the district's progress on the strategic plan? If we take a look at the parents again, we find that 93% rate the progress as either excellent or good, while only 6% rate it lower. And in fact, 35% rate the progress as being excellent. So in general then, we have among both groups, while we have different levels of familiarity with the plan, among those who feel that they are either very or somewhat familiar, the evaluations are strongly positive. Let's move on to a more general information question. One of the things that's been noteworthy about the school district over time has been the communication system that is in place. And we asked people first, how informed do you feel about the decisions made by the school board and administration? And what we found was that 69% indicated they were either very informed or somewhat informed. That's just shy of 70. The norm on this across the metropolitan area is at 55%, indicating that they are either very informed or somewhat informed. Is this a surprising rating? No, not given past ratings in terms of information levels here. Well, how do they feel in particular about being informed in a timely manner? And on this one, overall, 77% indicate excellent or good, with the only fair and poor being 20%. So on timeliness, almost 80% are saying they're satisfied. However, we do note that 20% did indicate a dissatisfaction with timeliness. Now, if we break this down among parents versus the overall sample, first, in terms of being informed about the decisions being made by the administration and board, 90% indicate they are very informed or somewhat informed. On the other hand, we only have 9% that feel that they're not too informed or not at all informed. So communications then directed toward the parents have been very strong and have shown very good results in terms of people's feeling about their levels of information. What about being informed in a timely manner? Well, here we have 92% of the parents indicating that they would give the job the district is doing either an excellent rating or a good rating, while the only fair and poor rating is just 7%. So again, a 92% favorable rating. Most people feel that timeliness is not an issue. I will say, however, that in a number of other metropolitan districts, it certainly is an issue, and there's a lot of variance between districts on this type of question. And then finally, let's take a look at the communication system in the Edina School District. And here we see some differences between residents as a whole and parents. Residents as a whole tend to place or more often indicate that their principal source of information is the Sun Current newspaper, 27%. As you can see, among parents, that comes in only at 11%. Another major difference has to do with the district website. Here, about a third of the parents indicate that that is their principal source of information, while only 16% of the overall sample indicated that. The district newsletter comes in about equally, roughly 12 to 14%. Among both groups, district mailings are given a bit more weight by the parents. Word of mouth is, of course, alive and well, as we've noticed in other surveys, and certainly your grapevine is lush. The Star Tribune, much more utilized by the overall sample than the parents, and emails much more utilized by parents as a principal source of information at 16%. So in general then, what can we say? And again, keep in mind that this is a sample that provides a confidence interval of plus or minus 5% for residents as a whole and 5.5% for parents of Edina School District children. In general, things have moved in a positive direction. What we find is the job ratings have remained constant, in some cases among the parents groups actually increasing by a significant amount. When we take a look at the perceptions of the district, we note over time that again those have been moving in a positive direction, with far more agreement than disagreement. With respect to the strategic plan, we can deduce two things. First, that familiarity with it is at a credible level, although it would be nice to see a higher level of familiarity, which is always a challenge. And second, among those that are familiar, and keep in mind that this is a subsegment of the entire student, or rather the entire residential population, or the parent population, are very pleased with the progress so far. In general then, I think that we can say that for the most part, residents again, and parents in particular, are very satisfied in general with what's happening in the district and give high ratings accordingly. Thank you.
Any questions, anybody? I know we covered this at the work session.
I just thought we could maybe ask, one of the questions we had asked during the work session was, were there any big surprises that you noticed since you've worked with our district for so long? And any advice that you would give us as we go forward and do future surveys, anything that you would recommend that we look at deeper?
In terms of comparisons with other districts, one of the key assets of this district is your communication system. You do, in comparison with other districts, an incredible job of keeping residents and parents in particular informed. That requires, though, a multiple use of sources, or rather a use of multiple sources. There is no one source that tends to dominate in this district. And so as a result, in terms of communication, it's necessary to rely not only on print, but also electronic, both email and the website. Overall, though, I think by and large, was there anything shocking? A couple of things were shocking. First, as I mentioned earlier, the concern about large class sizes is something that is going on straight across the metropolitan area. The difference here, however, is that it's a more moderated concern than what we see in other districts. That is still something to keep in mind, though, in terms of future planning. Taxes is always going to be an issue. Too high taxes is certainly an issue among a segment of your population. Nevertheless, I think in terms of tax climate here, we're looking at a more moderate tax climate than we would see directly to the west of you, in which that concern comes up very, very highly and very intensely. So overall then, I think what you have been doing in the past is good. In fact, it's solid, and in many districts we tell people that for best practices, particularly interestingly enough on communications, we regard Edina to be the one that really epitomizes what all districts should be doing just to keep information levels high. Now, is there room for improvement? Certainly, there's always room for improvement. But nevertheless, that's the key virtue in this district, and is something that should be prioritized, both over the short term and the long run.
Great, thank you, Bill.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.